boy, look at these lights.
That's gracious. More watts. Do we need this?
Thank you for applauding, because I was going to ask you to applaud my friends Candy Strait and Ellen Malcolm, who have joined us here tonight at a time that when we first talked about doing this, I assured them that it was a fine time of year because most papers were done and you all take your exams in January, and of course we didn't. Now they're throwing things already.
We haven't even said anything yet.
And of course, at that point, we didn't realize it was the Kennedy School formal and a number of House elections. But I am thrilled to have these women here and see so many faces joining us tonight who really do care about this issue. I am Liz Hager, and I am finishing up. I can't decide if it's tomorrow or really at the end of the semester in January, but I am finishing up being a fellow at the Institute of Politics, and I just had a session with the Fellows Committee and told them what a wonderful experience it has been. And one of the best parts of the experience was teaching a study group on women in politics and having so much interest from undergraduates. And that gives me great hope for the future, because some of you heard me talk when we first introduced the fellows in the fall to say, I don't think that any of us should be a bit satisfied until all city councils, county commissions, Congress, state legislatures, and all other groups like that, school boards, have at least 50% women. If it's a big enough group that it can have 51% women, then more power to it, because that's closer to the representation in the population. But one of the toughest things for women as they have gotten into the game of politics and into serious politics has been the money question. The raising of the money and how to do it. And it is both personal and technical. And we've heard some talk about it over the years, but I don't think we've heard enough talk about it. And the two people that have joined us tonight are the two people that I think know most about it. And that's why I wanted them to come talk with us about it. Ellen Malcolm founded Emily's List in 1985. Now, everybody does know what Emily's stands for, don't you? Early.
Very good.
Okay.
Give them an A.
Okay. And Ellen Malcolm had been active in Washington, D.C. For years before that. In the late 70s, she served as the press secretary for the National Women's Political Caucus, and she continued her career in politics by joining the White House staff in 1980 as press secretary for Esther Peterson, the president's special assistant for consumer affairs. And I'm sure that many of you have read in recent times how big and how successful Emily's List has been. I don't know, we'll hear from Candy too, I don't know if that's exactly the reason that she founded the wish list or not, but the wish list is women in the Senate and House, and I got to know Candy because it was women in the Senate and House, and me because I was running for governor, and I was the only one, the only Republican woman running for governor in the country at the time. And Candy and a number of other women founded Wish List with the same concept as Emily's List to fund Republican women. And they too have been very successful. They are much smaller because they are much younger and haven't had as many candidates yet. But I'm sure will grow by the same leaps and bounds that Emily's List has. Candy is a partner, is a principal of John Head and Partners, a merchant banking firm specializing in the insurance industry. And she flew in to join us tonight from Chicago, where she was on business, and which means we're particularly appreciative of all the work she's done. Her other political involvement has been as the co-chair of the Women's Campaign Fund, which is a bipartisan group supporting women running for public office. And in her capacity with Wish List and with the Women's Campaign Fund, and as a friend and acquaintance, she supported Christine Todd Whitman in her successful race for governor of New Jersey this fall, and she has been appointed as the chair of the co-chair of the 8-member panel to advise Governor-elect Whitman on ways to keep her biggest campaign pledge, cutting at least $1.2 billion from the state budget of the state of New Jersey while reducing income taxes. So we were asking Candy about it in there, and Ellen promised me I wouldn't take any questions on how you can cut the New Jersey budget, but I think if anybody wanted to sneak one in, Candy would probably be willing to answer it. So there is our introduction of our 2 special guests tonight, and I can add some of my perspective about fundraising and running for a major office in a little state where it's not very big financial stakes later on as we take questions. But first we will start with Ellen Malcolm.
Okay, Liz, thank you. I just had an interview with a reporter before I came over here, and she asked the question that so many people ask of me. They said, why did you start Emily's List? What was it? And I said, complete frustration of trying to get money into women's campaigns so they could compete. Let me tell you a little story about 1982. Harriet Woods was running for the Senate in Missouri against John Danforth. And she'd been a state senator. She had a very good record in public office. He had been, a lot of people thought, neglecting the state, hadn't been coming back, was vulnerable, and she started her campaign. And she was moving up and up in the polls. I actually believe in October at one point she was ahead of Danforth in the polls. And the old boys of Missouri, the traditional political guys that wrote the checks for Democratic candidates, never could believe that Harriet Woods was going to win this race, and they wouldn't give her any money. And because they wouldn't give her any money, she ran out of money in the last days of the campaign. She got socked with a negative campaign blitz on television and ended up losing the Missouri Senate race by about 25,000 votes. I mean, just absolutely nothing, because the guys couldn't believe that this woman could win this race. It is that credibility issue that really goes beyond women candidates on every single level of the campaign, but certainly in terms of their ability to raise money. Now, a group of us in 1982 were trying to help Harriet, and we were doing everything we could think of. We were writing our friends and calling old college roommates and, saying, there's this great woman out there running for the Senate, and will you write her a check? And everything we could think of to raise money for, we think we probably raised about $50,000 for in that Senate campaign. Well, we said we got to do something different. We have to find a way to raise money for women in quantity, and we have to find a way to raise money to give the women candidates credibility, to make those guys believe that the woman has a chance to win, to overcome that credibility gap that's really keeping women from getting the money from the traditional Democratic funders and putting together these major multi-million-dollar campaigns. So we created Emily's List as a donor network, and really, I think, reinvented political fundraising. Because, everybody knows about the PACs, the Political Action Committee. Well, what the PAC does is it raises money for itself. And then the PAC board decides where the money's going to go, and a PAC can contribute up to $5,000 in the primary election or $5,000 in the general election. So there's a ceiling of what a PAC can contribute to a campaign. Well, we said, we're going to do it differently. We're going to tell men and women around the country about these women candidates and raise money from individuals. And we created the Emily's List Donor Network, in which you pay $100 to be a member, And then we're like your political staff, and we go out and we find viable pro-choice Democratic women candidates. We tell you all about what's going on in the campaign. We give you profiles that gives you their positions on all kinds of issues. And then you decide who you want to support. It's not the PAC board making the decision. Each individual decides who they want to support, writes out the check, Harriet Woods for Senate, sends it back to us, and we forward those contributions onto the campaign. Now, if you have 1,000 people in the network and they all write $100 checks to Harriet Woods running for the Senate, you can raise $100,000 for the campaign as opposed to the 5 or 10 a PAC can contribute. So by empowering individuals, we can begin to build a grassroots fundraising network that can offset all that big special interest money that's pouring into the guys' campaigns. And we can give those women credibility. And that is the early money concept. That is why early money is like yeast. Because when a woman candidate starts raising some early money, she can go to the guys and say, look, I have a poll now. I have a campaign operation. I'm beginning to raise money. I've got money in the bank. And her credibility rises to the point that they start believing in her campaign and they start contributing to the campaign as well. So the whole concept is to leverage the amount of influence each one of us can have by all of us doing this together and building an incredible financial support for the women candidates. Remember I said in '82 we raised about $50,000 we thought for Harriet. Well, as Liz said, in 1992 the members of Emily's List contributed $6.2 million to women running for the House and Senate. So it's a way of tremendously building this incredible financial resource for the campaigns. And the result is that we are electing women to office in ways we've never seen before in this country. When we began Emily's List in 1985, we had never elected a Democratic woman governor of a large state. We had never elected a Democratic woman to the United States Senate in her own right. And when I looked at the House of Representatives, I discovered that from 1972 to '87, Democratic women in the House had gone down by 2, from 14 to 12. So we were getting nowhere in getting women, Democratic women, into high offices. Emily's List comes into effect. We've had 4 elections. We've helped Ann Richards become the first woman elected governor of a large state down in Texas, and it's going to have an incredible re-election race coming up this time. There are now 5 Democratic women in the United States Senate, the only women in the history, Democratic women in the history of this country, to be elected to the Senate in their own right. And the House that had declined, we've turned around and have tripled Democratic women in the House in the past 3 elections, from 12 to 36. So that's the power of grassroots fundraising. That's a way that men and women around this country wrote $100 checks to women candidates, and we're making history, and the Congress is different because of it.
Great. Candy?
Okay, I'll go on.
The Republican side.
The Republican side. Well, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on, the title of this thing is the price of equality, but I wanted to follow up on a few things that Ellen said. She taught, Emily's List was a brilliant idea, and the women of America are very fortunate that Ellen and her friends came up with it. And I'm a person who spends a lot of time when I'm not doing politics on Wall Street. And the way money is raised on Wall Street is that the president of an investment banking firm gets a call from a politician who says, I'm running, how much money can you raise for me? And what they basically say, oh, we'll raise $50,000 for you. And then he just, it's usually a he, calls his senior executives and say, this is what I have to do, you have to do it. The other story I will tell you is that a lobbyist called me after the race for the mayor, Giuliani's race for mayor of New York, and I'm a big supporter of Rudy Giuliani's, and Christy Whitman's race in New Jersey, and a big supporter personally of Christy Whitman's. And the lobbyist took me to lunch and said, how did you figure out that those two were going to win and you supported them? And I said to the lobbyist, I said, I'm a moderate Republican. There are very few moderate Republicans running. I would have supported them if they lost. I didn't handicap this damn thing and figure out that I was going to gain power because these two were going to win. But That just tells you how, in the past, in my opinion, money's been raised for politics. Ellen revolutionized it and changed things and has a true grassroots effort where individuals, frankly, can make up their own minds on who they'd like to choose, because Emily's List and the wish list will endorse, let's just pretend, anywhere from 10 to 50 candidates, and you can pick, after reading about them, who you want to support. And I personally think it's a much better way of raising money for candidates and having people throughout the country decide who they'd like to support than traditionally things have been done and still are done in the United States. Let me tell you a little bit about the wish list. The wish list was founded in 1992 by Glenda Greenwald, who's the president of the wish list and works on it more full-time than I do, and a group of about 15 to 20 other Republicans that are committed to getting the Republican Party, what I call, back into the center, into the mainstream. And frankly, the governor of the state of Massachusetts, Governor Weld, is on our advisory committee and has been a big supporter of the wish list. We're much smaller. We have about 2,000 members. In the 1992 election cycle, and we only had 1 year to raise money because we really started in January of '92, we gave away about $200,000, and it was money coming from our PAC. We're set up exactly like Emily's List, and then money going from our donor base into individual candidate races. In 1993, I think 1993 probably is the year of the challenger. The fact that Christy Whitman was not an incumbent governor helped her greatly. I think in the case of Mary Sue Terry's race against George Allen, Mary Sue Terry, because she was the sitting attorney general, was viewed as the incumbent. Kay Bailey Hutchison, who had a win in June in the special election, the Democrat was viewed as the incumbent. And so when we've gone through a period of what I call anti-incumbency, the wish list has done pretty well with our two candidates. We only had two major races. One was Kay for the United States Senate, and we raised about $50,000 for her, and then Christie for governor of New Jersey, we raised about $45,000. It's going to be more difficult for the wish list to raise money, frankly, than Emily's List. As Emily's List is, we are a pro-choice organization. If anybody thinks the hierarchy of the Republican Party is open on that issue, they do not understand the hierarchy of the Republican Party. The only way we can open them on that issue is to get candidates, particularly like a Christy Whitman, and in my opinion, a Rudy Giuliani, elected to show that our type of moderate Republican candidates and Bill Weld can get elected. And I say we always just got to keep it in their face, and maybe sometime we'll get them over there. But the Republican women that we support, their major problem, I always find, is frankly in the primary. Very few people vote in the primary, and the right wing of the Republican Party comes out strong and votes in a primary. And it's difficult to get money for a challenger in a primary. And that's one of the things that groups like the Wish List can do, and which Emily's List can also do for its candidates. That's what we're all about. We're going to try to expand our group, and hopefully working together, frankly, we'll get a lot more women in the House of Representatives, in governorships. I will note to you that Christy Todd Whitman is only the second woman in the history of our country that has been elected as a Republican governor. She's the only Republican woman right now, and she frankly was the first pro-choice Republican woman ever elected governor in the history of this country.
Ellen, my question, you so clearly explained your concept and what is referred to now as bundling, and in the I understand in the campaign finance reforms, they are trying to outlaw bundling. And Candy explained exactly how bundling has been done, i.e. in a Wall Street firm. Why I, for one, would like to see that part of it not done anymore. But I don't think your concept that Emily's List and Wish List use is the same thing at all. As you pointed out, you're not twisting the arms of of people you even know. You're simply informing a broad group of people who have asked you to inform them. What's your answer to this whole campaign finance reform from your angle?
Well, first of all, I have to explain what this bundling thing is that gets all this attention, because it occasionally, I have mentioned it to people and they say, wait a minute, that can't be it. It's too simple. There must be something else that you're doing that's wrong. The bundling refers to the fact that we give you information on candidates. You write out your checks to whoever you want. You send them back to us, and we send the checks to the campaigns. We bundle the checks together and send them in a group onto the campaigns. That is the entire substance of bundling that people think is such a problem. So it's basically what the reformers are saying is that you're going to bundle all these checks together and make all these claims to get around the contribution limits, and it's going to give you undue influence in the legislative process. Well, the problem is that in an ideal world, and in my opinion, in an ideal world, we'd have total public financing of campaigns. There is an incredible advantage for incumbents in the political system, and one of them certainly is in the way they can raise money. But they can't pass legislation that is completely clean. And so they go through the political process and the legislative process, and the Republicans want to protect their way of raising money, and the Democrats want to protect their way of raising money, and they fiddle and they diddle and they come out at the end. And no matter what they do, no matter what bill they pass, the high donor money, you know, the $1,000 check writers, the guys that Candy were talking about that get a call from the corporate CEO, though that money always will find a way into the system. It is not real hard for a president to make a suggestion to the vice president that the committee chair would like a $1,000 contribution. Every reform bill that's going to get passed is going to have ways that the big money is going to get through, and if women can't rely on the grassroots money, they can't compete. And that's what we've seen time and time again. The guys get the big checks, the women have to rely on the small donors, and if they can't figure out how to reach them and how to bring that money in, they can't compete. In the early 70s, I worked at Common Cause when we were working on campaign finance reform. We passed the 74 bill. We had great ideals of what campaign finance reform was going to be, but the reality is by the time the legislation was done, we had created PACs, we had created all kinds of ways that big check writers could contribute, and women couldn't compete. And in the 6 elections from the 74 bill until we began, we elected no Democratic women to the Senate, and we lost 2 seats in the House. We come along, and as I told you, we elected 5 women to the Senate and tripled Democratic women in the House because we found a way to get people to write $100 checks to offset that special interest money. That's campaign finance reform that's bringing people into the system and encouraging them to contribute to candidates, and that's campaign finance reform that's opening up the system so that women can finally break in.
The other thing I will say, though, that women over the last 10 years are, and you can't run for public office unless you're going to spend a lot of time raising money. I mean, that's just a job requirement. But women are getting better at it. They are making the contacts so that they can raise money. I note that 2 of the Republican women that are running in 1994, one is Pat Psyche, who lost a very tough race. She was a congresswoman. She lost a very tough race for the United States Senate. She was running for governor of Hawaii. She's been through it before. She knows how to do it, and she will be able to raise money. The other person that's raising a lot of money is Dr. Bernadine Healey. Well, she was in the Bush administration. She has contacts throughout the country as she was the director of the National Institutes of Health. Another woman that could run but probably will not run but is Barbara Franklin, who is the Secretary of Commerce. She has the ability to raise a lot of money. So we are seeing more and more women coming up through the pipeline so that they do have the ability to raise money, and you have to raise a heck of a lot of money to run for these offices. There's just no question about it.
You know, it goes back to the credibility issue I said, where people just don't believe in women candidates. And one of the wonderful things I think that happened in '92 was, first of all, voters saw women run in the biggest races in this country, and they saw them win the biggest races in this country. You know, they saw women elected senator from California and from Illinois and from Washington State. And so voters begin to believe that women can win these big races. But the other piece that is just fascinating is the money piece of what's happened with women. The biggest fundraisers in the '92 elections, in the top 5, were Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, and Carol Moseley Braun. Wow. Okay? Women are the biggest fundraisers in those Senate races. And when you look at the House races where they're open seats, where, you know, where it's the most hotly contested races, for the first time in history, Democratic women running in open seats raised substantially more money than Democratic men running in open seats, than Republican men running in open seats, and Republican women running in open seats. Women were the big fundraisers in the '92 elections. And so again, now you see Emily's list out there. We were the biggest contributor to House and Senate campaigns in the country in '92. So people know that we're around and wish list is around, and there are big ways of raising money for women candidates. And you can see the women raising millions and millions of dollars, and you're lifting the credibility of women candidates. And every time we do that, whether it's a win at the polls or another indication that women can raise money, that makes it easier for every woman who runs for office.
On that credibility angle, I was fascinated. New Hampshire has a funding cap on its races, and it's hard for those of you in big states to believe this, but our gubernatorial race is just $400,000 for the primary and $400,000 for the general. But after the primaries were over, both the candidate, the Republican candidate, who was a man who did go on to win and is governor now, and the woman Democratic candidate, Arnie Arneson, very, very quickly raised $400,000. I mean, people, they had proven themselves in those primaries, and the money just came right in, and they did not have to then focus for the rest of their campaign on money, which is very nice, because if you can be out there running and meeting voters, it's a lot easier than spending your time on the phone raising money.
And talking about, heaven forbid, issues.
Right, something horrible like that. You said, I think you just answered my next question, which was both Boxer and Feinstein and Braun races, all 3 of those races. Emily's list money was a significant proportion of their total?
Well, again, I'll give you a little fundraising strategy and sort of how you know, the early money concept, why it's so important. Women raise money differently from men, right? They raise grassroots money, small contributions. If you look at the California primary, Barbara Boxer running against Congressman Mel Levine, who had very strong national fundraising networks that he could tap into, and the Lieutenant Governor of California, Leo McCarthy. Mel Levine, in the primary, I think he got 93% of his money in contributions over $200. He got a lot of $1,000 checks. He was just making phone calls all day long, pulling in those $1,000 checks. Leo McCarthy did a little bit less than that, but Barbara got 60% of her money from people who were writing under $200 checks. So she was getting all kinds of $25, $50, $100 checks, the grassroots fundraising that women candidates need to depend on. Now here's how it can affect the campaign differently. To be able to do that when you're a woman candidate, you have to put together an extensive fundraising operation. You have to do a lot of direct mail, send out, lots and lots, hundreds of thousands of letters asking for people to contribute to the campaign. A lot of telemarketing on the telephone, calling just cold calls to hundreds, thousands of people, trying to get them to contribute to the campaign. Barbara ended up with 90,000 contributors in her Senate race. But it's very expensive to do that. It's not hard to have a cocktail party, spend 20 bucks on wine and cheese, get your $1,000 checks, you got, $980 in the bank, right? If you're doing all this mail and you're doing all this fundraising over the phone and you're doing all these small donor events, the cost of fundraising is very high. And it becomes very important that you start it early on. because the way you raise money is by going back to your contributors again and again, saying, boy, it's almost time for the election and they're coming after me. Will you please write me another check? That's the way you survive in the fundraising when you're doing that kind of business. Well, if you're a woman candidate and you can't raise any early money, then you can't begin that expensive process of building your fundraising operation. You can't start putting together your 90,000 contributor list. And so it's the early money that we go in with into a boxer's race or Carol's race or Diane's race that allows them to start what they need to rely on, that expensive grassroots fundraising, and allows them to put together that operation so that ultimately they're going to end up with enough money to go on television. Now, when I looked at the races before Election Day, and they're calling me up, and the campaigns are calling me up, and they say, we don't have enough money to go on television. I said, how can you not have enough money to go on television? You're one of the top 5 fundraisers in the country. Well, the reason is because they're women candidates, they have to raise grassroots money, and it costs more. So the net at the end of the process is less, see? So the key is to get them early money so they can get started, so when it comes to Election Day, they have the biggest possible net. That's all you ever need to know about fundraising. Go out and run campaigns now.
I need to stop asking questions and let you ask questions. There's a mic there and a mic there if anyone has any questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Amy Sandler. I work here at the Kennedy School. Thanks both for coming. My question, 2 questions actually. One is the whole double-edged sword of the Year of the Woman, which is that while women were able to enter in record-breaking numbers, there was also this higher standard to which they had to adhere, and particularly in terms of ethical, financial, going by the rules, and whether it's the Hutchinson or the Whitman situations in terms of the ethical standards. I wonder how this whole episode over bundling, when even the New York Times sort of singles out Emily's list, that women, in fact, are being held to a different standard, even though sort of they're not even equaling some of the numbers which we've seen in sort of the old boys network. The other question is sort of the flip side, which is even, and we look at university development, which is that women haven't been in the habit of giving money. So even if we're just talking $25, $50, $100, almost on a sociological level, how can you get to a broad number of women and say that, yes, you can be involved in politics, yes, you can give money, which is something that women probably traditionally haven't been as inclined to do?
Great questions.
Well, the first one, I'll tell you one thing. The minute you get power in politics, they come after you. And it is probably the great compliment that they came after Emily's list after the '92 elections. Certainly some well-meaning people who wanted to do reform, and I think some not so well-meaning members of Congress who thought, boy, this is great. I can get rid of Emily's list. I never have to face a well-funded woman, and I can hide behind reform while I'm doing it. What a deal, right? And so we went through a rather nasty process on the reform issues. I don't know that women are held to a higher standard all the time, but I think that there is a definite difference in the fact that we're not used to seeing women in powerful positions. And so whatever we do is in a bright light. And when we get power, they certainly come and try and take it away. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. I actually should tell you that not only are they coming after us at the national level, but they're beginning to do it in the state legislatures. I'll tell you a great story in Michigan when we were going to get involved in a woman's race who was running against Governor Engler in Michigan, and all of a sudden the Chamber of Commerce starts filing all these complaints against us, goes to the press, basically holds up our ability to raise money for the candidate until the Secretary of State could rule, and of course ruled in our favor. I mean, what we're doing is absolutely above board and fine, but delayed the whole process, tried to create a political issue to take Emily's list out of that race, and it is what we're going to see a lot more of.
I would just say that the New York Times, and one who works in New York but lives in New Jersey, frankly was just dead wrong on the issue. And as one who watches the New York Times do endorse women or not endorse women and write about women, some of the most, and I figured it would never do any good to write to the New York Times, but some of the things that I get most angry about, I read in the New York Times and their coverage about women. In your question about the year of the woman and what I think 1994, what we have to focus on, will be the year of what I will call the outsider. And just because we have 7 women in the Senate, women are still outsiders, and hopefully women will be able to take advantage of that. It's the other thing. As someone who suffered through Christy Whitman's race, it was a very difficult race. Jim Florio is one tough politician, and he was not going to let any stone unturned. It is pretty rough out there for any politician, whether you're a male or a female. The voters are angry, and I sympathize with anybody probably today running for office, because it's a very, very difficult thing, and you really put yourself out on the firing line, particularly for individuals who have families, both men and women. I think I saw Christie's children go through this, and it's a pretty difficult process. And I hope you all will probably try to support some good people, because it isn't easy what they're doing today.
Also, on your excellent perspective on the whole question of women and fundraising in general, time needs to help with that. I mean, women, we're starting to talk about that, and I think women are thinking about their own giving patterns because of the discussion about it. But I think that women my age and older particularly are still have a really tough time with it, and hopefully it's going to be your generation that starts understanding more of that, because I sure saw it. I mean, my friend Susan McLean, that some of you have heard speak here, who was a fellow a number of years ago, tells her story about her husband running for governor in 1972, and when she then ran for Congress in 1980, the very same people who had written $100 checks to him said to her, "Oh, I'm so glad you're running. I can't wait to support you. Let me give you some money," and would give her $25. And it's tough to say to them, look them in the eye and say, "Wait a minute, you gave my husband 100. Why did you only give me 25? We've got to keep getting at that and keep pushing women.
I would say for the men that are traditional givers, and if for some reason they give less to a woman, you just have to go back and say, I'm going to win this race and I want $1,000. And whether a fundraiser is asking it for the woman or the woman directly, with respect to women who may not have a tradition of giving money, nothing breeds success like success. And if you make a contribution to a Barbara Boxer's campaign or even a Christy Whitman's campaign, and you see the results, and you see some legislation passed, whether it's breast cancer research or whatever, and you can actually see the results of these people making a difference, then you'll want to make another investment. And we just have to go through that process. And just add, the price of equality is just asking for money. You just have to keep asking and asking, and get after it. That's all.
Chris?
First of all, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Student Advisory Committee here at the IOP. And the first question is a general one, and then the next two are really for Ms. Malcolm. On a general level, the degree to which issues play a part in credibility, and the degree to which you think it might be necessary to break a stereotype in this country that women who run for office only confront women's issues, and how that should be perhaps defeated and overcome. Then particularly for Ms. Malcolm, you mentioned about public funding. In an ideal world, do you want everything public funded? But
can we do the first question first?
Okay,
Because I always
sure.
lose track of the questions.
okay.
And I'd love to answer your first question, Chris, because I think it was very clear to me, both personally and politically in my gubernatorial race, that I wanted to stand on my long record on women's issues and my long record of activism in the women's movement for the past 20 years, and assume that people knew that about me but not talk about it, because that's not what the voters were looking for in a gubernatorial race. And that is a fine line to walk. But most races, or a lot of the races people get in, certainly we could talk at length about both Mary Sue Terry and Christy Todd Whitman's race on that level. But the issues that the voters are looking for, even though they are issues that some of us would define as women's issues, like health and education and employment issues, the voters don't want them defined that way.
The other thing too is what the voters are focusing on can change from year to year, month to month. And '93, crime was a really big issue. It wasn't as big of an issue in '92. I mean, if things go awry in Russia, maybe foreign policy will be a bigger issue. It wasn't as big an issue. So as a politician, you have to know what the issues are that are on the voters' minds, and you have a position on that, and you articulate, and hopefully they reach out to it. I really don't see these women just running on women's issues. And I mean, Marge Ruckamo is a congresswoman from New Jersey. Her favorite statement is, all issues are women's issues and men's issues. So, you know, they get elected by what voters are focusing on that November, usually.
Okay, and then the other question was on public funding. In an ideal world, you'd want it publicly funded. And given the position, perhaps, that women are in now, it might seem appropriate to want to change the rules. But as women get into the corporate boardrooms, it would seem to me that there would be a time, 10 years, 15 years down the road, where it would be very convenient for them to take advantage of that system and form an all-women's network, so to speak. And I was wondering if you comment on that. And also,
We have one of those already.
and why only, I can understand Ms. Straight's frustration with the pro-choice issue and the Republican Party, but what's your frustration? Why would you only support pro-choice women in the Democratic Party?
Okay, public funding. Those are two big issues in one question. I think there's something wrong with a system where the corporate CEO can go to the vice presidents and deliver a lot of money and have access that college students caring about their loans and, you know, how they're going to get enough money to go through college don't have that kind of influence. So I think from a legislative point of view, we need to take money out of politics. Certainly, if you look at the elections, you need to take the special interest money out of politics because it goes to where when people have a PAC and they care about a legislative agenda, what they really want is a vote when you're elected, right? That's the whole deal here. They're really looking for a vote. And that's why they don't support challengers, because they know that the incumbents have an advantage. So they give the money to the incumbent because that's the likely person that's going to win. And the more they do that, the more likely it is that the incumbent's going to win. It's all going back to their wanting to influence the legislative process. And it tilts the entire system so that newcomers can't break in. And, you know, there may be a point when women are equal in the financial world, but still the point is the newcomers can't break in. And whether it's men or women, you know, you've got a system that just cements those guys into office. And I don't think that comes up with good policies. When you see shifts of tremendous changes that have taken place in this country as women and minorities have moved into the mainstream, or at least begin to move into the mainstream, you have a Congress and our representative democracy that doesn't hear the voices and experiences of women, it doesn't hear the voices and experiences of minorities, then the Congress can't solve the problems that they're trying to deal with. So it's out of step with what's going on in the culture, with that's going on in the community. And so we end up with a Congress that everybody's furious at because it doesn't represent us anymore. All right? Now, what was the other one?
Let me just quick, can I say something on public funding? And Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it's real popular when you take polls.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's not, you know, so it's just not, it's not a popular concept of funding all these races. So that's going to be a problem too. So
here's why it is. Because here's a very simple thing. I'm running against somebody who took public funding. You know, first they get a pay raise, they have all these perks, they have the house bank, and now they want me to pay for their campaigns with my tax dollars. That's the end of public financing. Right. You can't get it passed politically. Right. And that's what I'm saying. In my ideal world, you do that, but I'm not going to get that through because an awful lot of voters out there think it's a terrible idea. So that's when you start tinkering with all the legislation, and that's when you have to be real careful that small contributors have a way to participate.
Politicians are also very good at increasing, incumbent politicians are very good at increasing the barriers of entry for individuals who are not incumbents. And it's not in any member of Congress's best interest to pass a law that's going to kick them out of their job. So you just have to be careful and continue to work hard.
His other question was pro-choice
Oh,
candidates.
choice issue. The choice issue is fundamentally critical to our members. Our members, men and women, think that we need to protect a woman's right to choose, and they unify around it. It is, when you talk to them, it is very clear. We did a survey of our membership. It is as important to our members as electing women, and that's why it's one of our criteria, or our, you know.
So then if a pro-life woman came to you, a pro-life woman also being a woman, came to you, you wouldn't fund her?
Correct.
Yes.
We've heard a bit about the importance of introducing women to the habit of contributing to campaigns, and I wanted to ask the panelists if either of your organizations have strategies to reach out to college women and pre-professional younger women to sort of introduce them to this habit, since college, I can tell you from my experience, has been a time of great political awakening, also awakening to gender issues. And it's, although we can't yet afford the $100 plus donations, this is a time where we might like to get a piece of ownership in the process by the, you know, the $10 to $25 contributions perhaps. And the channels perhaps aren't as obvious as those from the outside might think they are, since this is a time where so many groups and organizations are competing for our attention. There's not this push for the contributing aspect of politics.
The wish list is toyed with having what I'll call a junior membership. But what we've actually done, and we're only 2 years old, so and we haven't probably thought through it yet. We need to raise a lot of money for these candidates. So for us to spend our volunteer time trying to build up a junior membership is difficult. But what we frankly have done is we'll take any contribution from $1 to $100 and above. And anybody that actually has given us a contribution in the last 2 years has gotten all of our mailings. And some of those people do send a $5 check to candidates. And I can tell you that those candidates are as appreciative of those $5 checks as they are of anyone, particularly if they're in their district and it means they're going to vote for them.
You know, one of the things that we try to do, and we've talked about the shift in financial power for women, is to get women to write bigger checks. You know, very often women have the financial ability to write $100 or $1,000 checks, but they've never done it before. They don't think of themselves as big check writers. And so what we did when we started Emily's List, nobody ever, in all these political organizations, nobody ever asked for $100. I mean, it was just unheard of. But we thought we've got to educate women to step up to the line, to get out of this sort of bake sale mentality and do what they have the ability to do, which is write these $100 checks. And so everything about Emily's List, when I talk about it, is always in this $100 number to market the fact that women can write $100 checks. And so that's one reason that we are very reluctant to have any other level of membership, because it just undermines this real change, really, that we've been able to create in women. I mean, to have 24,000 people writing, you know, these $100 checks, say it's up to $6.2 million, that's a lot of money. And that was never done before. But what we do say to folks that can't, the younger women such as yourself, is get together with a couple of your friends and you know, join under one membership. We'll send you the information, sit down with all of them, go over the profiles, decide who you want to write the checks to. We'd love to have you. And I get some brochures after here. I'll sign up.
One of the interesting things is the psychology I notice of some women. I have friends that give like $100 a month, and they get to $100 a month. You can get $1,000 to a candidate, and it's because they believe in the candidate, they believe in the cause. But the irony to me is what a man would do in that situation is write the $1,000 up front to get access. And so it's just a different way of approaching things.
And I also have an anecdote. I have heard Ellen say the kinds of things she just said. I've heard her say it before, and I have spent some time in my career as a fundraising consultant. So this came as a total shock to me. But my sister had a fundraiser for me soon after I announced. She had a fundraiser for me in Des Moines, Iowa. And she was inviting her friends for tea. And I know her friends, and they are very wealthy. So I was really excited about this tea, because I already was deep into this gubernatorial campaign. And I had done what I know candidates have to do, which is very scary, which is ask people for $5,000 gifts. And they had all the checks in an envelope, and as soon as the tea was over, I opened the envelope and started going through the checks. And it was just what you said. It was $25 checks. There was even a $10 check from a woman who I know has millions of dollars. Well, it's because no candidate had ever asked the women before for the money. They know their husbands give to candidates. They must not have asked their husbands what to give. But I wish I had known then what I know now, because we would have set a limit on coming to this tea. Because if we had asked them for 100, I think they would have given 100. Now, your question generated this response. That wasn't the question, but I'm glad you asked the question, and I'm glad Ellen gave you the suggestion of pooling. Bundling your money to join Emily's list.
Create your own little network.
Right, your own bundle to join. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. I have a question that's slightly tangential.
No more so than Chris's.
No. Well, a lot of the women that you named as having helped in the past elections, like Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, Carol Moseley Braun, and recently Christine Todd Whitman, were already established politicians, maybe not in the national sense, but locally. And the fact that your organizations helped them with, overcome that barrier of fundraising is very admirable. My question, though, takes things back a step. What about that political front door? That first barrier is getting women involved in politics in the first place, which all these women already were. And I was wondering if there is a role, and I might be, stretching things a bit, if there is a role for organizations like yours or similar to yours to get women involved in politics in the first place, other than letting them know that, hey, the money's here.
We have one of our sister organizations does a very good job of that, the National Women's Political Caucus, that organizes at the local and state level, and it really focuses on training women how to run for city councils and state legislatures and get them into the system. And it's one of the reasons that Candy and I work together and with the Women's Campaign Fund, is because I think if you really want to get women all the way up to the White House, you have to find lots of different organizations that focus on different parts of the task. And so the caucus does that. The Women's Campaign Fund for years has done a wonderful job of training people, of supporting women running statewide and at the top races. And then when you needed the extra money, we created Emily's List and Wish List.
The other thing I always tell women, too, is that if you really want to get involved, just help out in a race. And that's something that young women can do without put time in, and young men that may not have the money. And I note that when you work in a successful race, it's amazing to me now, all the Republican women in New Jersey that want to run for office. Because unfortunately, they probably think it's too easy. They do now. And what you have to frankly do is sort it out to explain to them they live in a Democratic district. It's not going to work, folks. But you just get more people involved. And I always do encourage people to work in races where they live, in addition to giving money, because that's the best way to learn it. It's just to be there as best you can.
And let me add one expansion of one of the things that Ellen just said is, you're right, people have to be recruited to run at the basic level to start. And then someone like me, who got well entrenched at a basic level, had the opportunity to come to a Women's Campaign Fund conference here in this building. In 1989, they just did one 2 months ago out in LA, and did one 2 years ago in Austin, Texas, but I came to the one here in 1989, and I had pretty much decided that I was not going to run for higher office, that I was perfectly satisfied where I was. And then I heard Madeleine Kunin talk about being governor of Vermont, and why it's important to have a woman governor, and how tough it is to run as a woman. And I just decided right then there that when I had an opportunity, I would run for governor of her neighboring state. So there are all those levels when you're working up to that. And you're right, everybody has to work at all those.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Curtis Nelson, and I raise money here at the Kennedy School. And
Okay.
we are also a very new, young concern with lots of grassroots, small contributors, but we're getting to the point where we have larger contributors, and I'm starting to need to tango with the big boys over in the University Development Office, which is leading me to ask you about parallels. It sounds to me that perhaps you would have some words of wisdom in your dealings with the big brothers in the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee, their fundraising apparatuses. What sort of experience have you had, would you like to have, do you fear to have with those organizations?
We're actually very independent of the party organizations. I mean, we certainly have races where we're both doing the same thing. In politics, they respect what you deliver. And we deliver a lot, and they know it now. And so there certainly is a different level of respect than we had before. But I have to tell you, there's still a sense that women still are the outsiders in politics, and they respect us, but they kind of forget about us. You know, we're sort of not around, I think, in their...
They haven't offered you a seat at the table?
Well, not exactly. I mean, from time to time we're there, and if I'm there, they're very friendly. But I think the first time they have an issue question, they don't think, gee, I'm going to call up Ellen and see what she thinks. There's a disconnect there that really we haven't figured out how to breach yet, which of course gives you no help whatsoever with the big boys in the development office.
Well, you know, the other thing, though, is that one of the things that I do, because the Republican Party can raise a lot of money, is that just to remind them, and we, particularly with the 1992 congressional races, some of us were very active in reminding the congressional committee that, you know, damn it, they better support some of these good Republican women. So what we just do is stay in their faces. I mean, that's what we try to do, and we, you know, whenever Senator Dole is in town, and Senator Dole comes all over the country trying to raise money for Republicans, we just remind him that, you know, he better remember Republican women, and that's just keeping them honest. But it is very, very difficult, and you have to realize that they are trying to do sometimes something different, and they've got to raise money too, and frequently you're all going to the same donors, and so it's difficult, and you're competing with people. But
see, but I think the concept of competition in fundraising is often wrong. I mean, if you look at the women's groups, people say, well, you compete with the Women's Campaign Fund, or you compete with people that are trying to do local groups, like GEM is trying to do here, or some of the other organizations. It's not true. The competition for a fundraiser is apathy. It's trying to get people interested and excited and motivated to write a check. So to the extent that they're able to tap into a donor base and get people excited, that helps you. And to the extent that you have something different to sell about this place and you can get people excited, that helps them. And I think that's the way you may find a common connection, is talk about how you can share excited donors out there, because it ultimately isn't competition. The people who give are the people who give, and they give again and again and again.
You don't see some sort of alliance with the main party as being a strategic avenue to get to the $1,000 and the $5,000 women check?
Hey, we got women now that are writing $1,000 checks. We have something we call the Majority Council. We have over 1,000 members of the Majority Council, and we have now 12 women who are giving Emily's List and candidates $25,000 a year. Women are writing big checks. We're learning how to do this. We're taking our financial power, and the result is what you see on Capitol Hill.
I was at a Republican fundraiser last night, and Newt Gingrich was there. It's an interesting person, but what they were doing was the men were walking around all noting, and they would walk up and say, I'm a Team 100 member. Well, what a Team 100 member is, the people give $100,000 to the Republican Party. So, you know, they're all there, and if you can be a Team 100 member, you can be at least a Team 1,000 member. The wish list is where you give $1,000 to the wish list, and you just work it and just keep after them.
Thanks.
One more question.
Yes, Ms. Hager, you mentioned in your opening comments that you would be excited for the day when you saw 50% of representation being women. In gender studies right now, a lot of the contemporary debate is over, when we talk about electing women to office, we're generally talking about white middle-class women. What I want to know is how successful is Emily's List and the wish list in reaching out, say, to women of color, to working-class women? Is Carol Moseley Braun an anomaly, I guess is what I'm asking.
The over 30% of the candidates we've supported for the House have been women of color. And in fact, in the 92 elections, we added up for the Congressional Black Caucus what we had given to African American candidates, raised for African American candidates in 92, and it was $800,000. So my guess is that Emily's List is actually the biggest financial resource for African American candidates in the country. Our members have a tremendous commitment to diversity, to bringing in women of color, and the results are in some wonderful women elected in Congress. Let me tell you a great story, because it's absolutely the theme of what we've been talking about how women raise money differently from men. There's a woman named Eva Clayton from Warren County, North Carolina. She was a supervisor down there, and she ran in one of the new districts against Walter Jones, Jr., who is the son of the retiring Congressman Walter Jones. Now, guess where the big money went in that race? Of course, it went to Walter Jones, Jr. And Eva had to rely in this very rural district on a couple of PAC contributions and the members of Emily's List, who were hearing about her campaign. Our members from all around the country sending her checks. She got through the primary, was into the runoff, and beat Walter Jones, Jr. in the runoff, and is now the freshman class president in the House of Representatives. Okay. So that's the power of the list and what we can do in those races, and it's terrific.
Yeah, with the wish list, it's difficult because frequently women of color live in districts that are Democrat. And so their opportunities to win an election is more difficult. We, in 1992, mailed for 10 candidates, and 2 of those 10 candidates were women of color. They both lost. One lost in a primary, but the one that we supported in the primary got as much money as the other women that we were supporting, and they tended to draw very well. So as far as from our donor base, we were giving them money. And we supported both of those 2 women in that we hoped that they would go on to have more of a future within the Republican Party, because we knew that their chances probably of winning were not as great. And Wish List and Emily's List are trying to get the women that are the most viable and really put big money in there. But the Wish List has a commitment to try to bring in minority women. But it'll be very, very difficult in the Republican Party. But we'll continue to try to do that.
Thank you.
I do one more question because you've been waiting just as long as she had, so then we'll have to cut.
I'm Carol Martin, an alum of the Kennedy School and a political consultant before I came to the school, and worked on Patty Murray's race when she first ran for office. And I would like to talk about the spillover, or raise the issue of the spillover effect of early money. In the instance with Patty Murray, she couldn't get coverage, media coverage, in the district until the money came in from Emily's List. And when that money came in, it certainly went a long way to enhancing her credibility and certainly raising her viability as a candidate. And you mentioned the issue of disconnect in terms of sitting at the table with the large donors, and I think the issue of having the candidates presented in the mass media as viable, credible candidates speaks to both lists and both candidates all of the candidates that you represent. And if there is a mechanism that can be found in both the lists to get more information out as opposed to relying solely on the market media or the media markets that the individual candidates run in, I think that would generate a lot more support and help address the issue of disconnect.
Excellent. Thank you all very much, and thank you particularly, Candy and Ellen, for your long trips up here into this cold New England, and have safe trips home. And you were great to impart all this information to us. Thank you all for coming. I can ask this question. Sure, come ask him a question now.
It's okay.
Hi, I spoke to you this morning.
Oh,
Sasha
good.
Capital.
Hi.
I'm a journalist.
Yes.
I'm a journalist. I wanted to know, amongst other things, how do you both handle the issue of supporter support a man who's strong on women's rights than a woman who is not as good a candidate?
Oh, good, I knew you guys would have.
Our view of that is there are lots of organizations that support men. Lots of them in Congress, and our interest is supporting women, and that's what we're about. Call the office, though.
A year and a couple
Oh, is
of
it,
months.
is it addition? Yes, mother's always late, so
Oh,
we could leave her something like that.
Hi.
Hello?
What are you doing?
I know you're doing Outward Bound.
oh, yeah, interested, yeah.
Women, I suspect there are.
I know, you gotta make it hard for us.
Oh, yeah, it is, oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, not all pieces of it, of course.
I mean, not executives, maybe.
No, but